Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, How Hackers Attack, What You Can Do to Protect Your Practice. Before we begin our presentation today, I would like to take a few moments to go over some housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar, and the PowerPoint slides can be downloaded from the resource list on the left of your screen. In today's webinar, Mr. Pfiester and Mr. Huston will discuss what hackers are after, law firm cyber attacks in the news, a few words from the ABA on cybersecurity, and the presentation will also include a hacking demo. To give you a little background about our presenter, Kai Pfiester, he is a cybersecurity expert and president of Black Cipher Security, a local cybersecurity company. He specializes in helping small to medium-sized businesses protect themselves from hackers, malware, insider threats, and physical theft. Prior to starting his own business, he worked as a field engineer for Santander Bank and as a desktop support team at Lockheed Martin in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Shawn Huston is the CEO of Legal Support Partners, a firm that offers e-discovery, forensic technology, and consulting services to law firms and corporations. Over the years, Shawn has worked on a number of high-profile cases, including Enron and WorldCom civil and criminal litigation, asbestos and product liability class actions, government security issues, multi-billion-dollar second requests, major SEC fraud investigations, and thousands of other civil and criminal cases. Mr. Pfiester and Mr. Huston welcome your questions. Please use the Q&A widget to submit your questions throughout the presentation. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Also, please complete the survey that will appear to the right of your screen at the end of the presentation. Thank you all again for attending today, and Kai and Shawn, the presentation is now turned over to you.
Thanks, Emily. As she mentioned, the idea of the webinar today is to help firms and attorneys understand the data security issues that they're facing so that, and hopefully at the end of this, have some information and a baseline to go off to prepare for potential issues in this area. A lot of people, I find, don't think that hackers would be interested in the data that they have, or maybe that they think they're too small to be on the radar of hackers, or people primarily think of folks that are, after big corporations. You hear of things like the Target attack, the Sony attack. But what we find is that that's not the case. While those maybe make the headlines, there's a lot of other issues out there where it's not the big corporations that you're hearing about. So in terms of data that law firms have that may be of interest, it kind of runs the gamut. It could be anything from Social Security numbers, personal information like birth dates, names, addresses, any information that can be tied to a person and or potentially be used for some type of criminal activity or fraud, tax information, credit information, IP, intellectual property related to products and companies, driver's licenses, numbers, medical records, personal health information. For folks dealing with anything related to medical records, potential HIPAA violations could be significant. The payment card data, people typically think of credit card information when it comes to these things. But where they may not actively store credit card information from customers, they may not think that they have an issue. But there's also reports, and we'll get into some specifics about how firms have been subject to hacks and have had their funds from their firm accounts withdrawn from hackers. So kind of the list goes on and on, from crypto locker or ransomware, as it's often referred to, in terms of encrypting files on servers. So there's a lot of data out there. And even if, it could be something as simple as monitoring an attorney's email to look for M&A information related to certain corporations, and then using that to trade stocks, essentially insider trading without anyone realizing it. So there's a lot of potential issues around data, and obviously the confidentiality of clients' information, and the dealing with privileged communications with clients. There's a significant risk factor. Kai, do you have anything to follow up on that one?
No, you pretty much covered it. We can move forward.
Okay, great. So again, law firms, while it may not be, kind of at the top of the list in terms of the thought process for subjects of cyber attacks, we actually see it as, law firms kind of are holding the golden ring, if you will, for data that they're storing or that they're communicating with their clients about. So, typically, in my kind of e-discovery and forensic world, essentially we're helping clients to gather and store and categorize probably the most important data potentially related to a client, and for sure the most potentially embarrassing data for a client. So, those are all things that, for hackers that may be aware of that, it's kind of a one-stop shop for multiple clients or for multiple corporations all at once. One of them, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something financially related. In fact, although it wasn't a law firm, like the Sony email hack was more embarrassing than anything, but does a tremendous amount of reputational damage. So we'll go through some things that are in the news in terms of some examples where law firms have been subject to cyber attacks, to kind of paint a picture in terms of what some of the issues that you could potentially face, and we'll get into after that what one of those attacks may look like from behind the scenes, which Kyle do that demo and show how that would work from the hacker standpoint. So there's a lot of stories out there, and one of the, and having done multiple data breach and cybersecurity presentations, one of the questions that I usually lead off with is who in the room has been hacked, and usually one or two nervous hands go up, but the bulk of the room stays silent. And typically, the rule of thumb is either you acknowledge you've been hacked or you just don't know it yet. So whether it's on a personal level, on a firm level, with the amount of people out there kind of doing bad things in the interwebs, there's a lot going on. Whether it's on a personal basis, through some of the retail issues that we've seen over the last couple of years, or on a firm basis. But one of the quotes from this article here was that hackers see attorney as a backdoor to the valuable data of their clients. That's what I was talking about earlier, where you all in your firms are holding that golden ring that makes it easier for hackers to get. So, Kai, what do you in terms of what you were seeing from the law firm side, or your opinion on the law firm side? What's your take on that?
Well, law firms are definitely a major target. They're often used to pivot into their clients' networks as well. A lot of law firms will contract with major companies. So, like, let's say a law firm gets a contract to do work for Bank of America or any other major client. The attacker will see that the bigger corporation has better security. So if they can get through the company that's connected to them with less security, it's a much easier obstacle to overcome.
So here's an example of a specific issue with a law firm where their own firm's trust account was hacked. Kai, you want to tell us a little bit about this one?
So here you see at the last sentence it says, the virus copied bank account passwords as she typed them. In the demo, I'm going to show you exactly how that happens.
So yeah, again, this case here, it was an issue where, unbeknownst to the employee of the firm, a virus was installed on her computer, and the passwords to the firm's bank accounts were captured as she typed them, and then a six-figure sum was transferred out of the account. So, those are types of things that can happen not only to individuals but also to law firms. And again, something like that can have significant financial issue damage, but do reputational damage to a firm or company as well. Here's an example of CryptoLocker or ransomware that again can affect law firms. Where in this case, a Charlotte, North Carolina firm unwillingly launched a CryptoLocker program, which for those of you who aren't aware of what that does, it basically encrypts the files on a server, on a computer, and locks them so you can't access them. And then essentially a deadline is set up by the hacker where either you pay the ransom or your files are destroyed. And then if you don't have a backup of those files, you will not be able to access them ever again. So, and we see everything from law firms have to deal with that, including police departments. So, and typically there's two answers to dealing with that we see. One is to have a backup of that data so you don't need to pay the ransom. So essentially you can wipe the system and recreate it from your backup, or pay the ransom. Essentially those are the two options. If you talk to folks in the FBI, they'll tell you the same thing. Those are basically the options, and even the options for the police departments. There's no magic wand when it comes to that. These people are outside of the country, and no one's sending a CIA team to go find somebody sitting in front of a computer who's asking for $500 in Bitcoin, who encrypted some files. So that's a good example of the importance of backups and data backups. But it's also an example of how human error can, no matter what type of technology you put in place, can undo whatever systems that you have in place. So it's just something as simple as, in this case, a voicemail attachment that came into via an email. Someone clicked to open it, and next thing you know, their files were encrypted and locked, and they were being asked to pay a ransom. So those types of things happen as well in firms. So, Kai, do you want to any comments on that? And
yeah,
talk about the
what I'll say about this too. Yeah, what I'll say about this too is the deadline is usually 72 hours. They also give you a message. They provide a message telling you that if any attempts are made to gain access, like if your IT department, in this case, this particular firm's IT department attempt to break the encryption, they were unsuccessful and they lost everything. They didn't have backups. The other thing is, you know, if you do pay the ransom, you still don't know what other software is lurking on that system. So, you know, essentially, even if you pay the ransom and you get access to your files again, if that system isn't completely scrubbed, if your network isn't completely scrubbed, there could be malware lurking in the background that's recording your keystrokes. So, you know, usually if you get hit with something like this, and it's successful, it can create a whole host of additional problems.
Kai? What about the example like here about essentially an inside job or an angry ex-employee?
Yeah. I mean, it's rare, but it does happen, and these are cases that, you know, companies need to consider. A lot of law firms and companies in general will lay off an employee, fire an employee. They will not shut down that account. They don't limit who has access to what. So essentially everyone in the company has high-level access. It's probably running the machines on admin-level accounts. And, you know, this presents a whole host of problems because sometimes you have malicious individuals, such as, you know, this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and when it came to employees, I mean, when I started in this business, you know, it was still, you know, the issue, it wasn't documents on a computer, it was documents in file cabinets. So, yeah, then, you know, you worried about someone, you know, damaging paper files or taking something from the office that they shouldn't, you know, damaging personal property. But this is the kind of the computer age where everything is electronic and potentially accessible for people who are intent on doing harm. You know, the stakes are much higher. So, you know, when dealing with employees, former employees, it's definitely important to make sure policies are in place to protect against these types of things.
Correct.
So law firms again get you know, here's a story of law firms getting hacked for deal data, kind of like I mentioned earlier with firms holding information related to potential upcoming deals that people can make money off of, essentially. So it's a real thing. It really happens. It has happened. So I mean, it's you know, simple things like that where, you know, maybe they're not attacking you necessarily, attacking the systems you have in place, but they're using the information, gaining access to your systems, and then using that to make money in other ways. So, I mean, there's a lot of potential angles that different people take to when it comes to data security and breaches. So, motivation, you may not understand the motivation at the time, but, you know, essentially, you know, there's a bunch of different ways to make money off of a lot of information out there, and that's you know, typically, you know, except just revenge, that's one of the primary reasons why these things happen is because it's to make money.
One thing I'd like to chime in too about that is, I mean, just as in the real world you have different levels of criminal, right? You might have, you know, a random, you know, drug addict who, you know, goes into people's backyards looking for things to steal, to sell, to get money. You know, then you have more sophisticated individuals, say a cat burglar, you know, who is very strategic in his approach. He doesn't just pick anyone. And then you have, you know, say like organized crime syndicates who actually get down and they strategize of, you know, different ways they can, you know, shake down people, so to speak. And then you have like nation state, you know, where you're dealing with China or Russia that's looking for, you know, information like this that allows them, say, to trade stock or do whatever. So that just shows that, you know, that there's different types of attackers out there, and they're motivated by different reasons.
Absolutely, that's a good point. So again, and you know, here's the kind of the next story. You know, essentially was an issue of animosity or revenge, where the neighbor of an attorney had some dispute with him and hacked his Wi-Fi account and then emailed pornography and child porn to his colleagues. You know, apparently made threats against government officials, and you know, on the surface, you know, it looked like it came from this attorney's computer, from his accounts, from his Wi-Fi network. So, I mean, there's things like that can happen, and obviously in this case did happen. So, you know, this obviously was a very targeted attack by an individual who felt wronged in some way, and those types of attacks versus kind of the crimes of opportunity type of attacks can be hard to stop because of, you know, to a certain extent, you know, if somebody wants it bad enough and has the knowledge, you know, there's a huge potential for them finding a way in. So those things, you know, you definitely want to be wary of, and you know, make sure that, you know, essentially, you know, when it comes to crimes of opportunity, make sure that you're not the low-hanging fruit, you know, that the easy get for a cyber attack. But when it comes to directed attacks from people who you know, have some agenda, those attacks you'll find will be harder to stop. And then, you know, in terms of the kind of general, there's, you know, you find more and more discussions and articles on firms being hacked. You know, in 2009, NBC talked about the FBI issuing an advisory to warn companies of noticeable increases in efforts to hack into their law firm's computer systems. And that trend is something that has continued to pick up steam, and you know, goes back a few years now. So not only can, you know, just like it says here in the article, not only are firms not immune from hacks or data breaches, you know, people, you know, the cyber criminals in the know are starting to actively and specifically target law firms. So, I mean, that's kind of a warning to kind of everyone in the legal profession to make sure that, you know, there's some steps being taken to protect their clients' data.
Excellent.
So, and then, even there's, again, with the note of more and more articles and information coming out there where, the business is not keeping up with the capabilities of threat actors. And as we go into some of the ABA and certain state bars, some of their comments on data security expectations will go into that. But the cyber threat profile and the capabilities of cyber attackers continually evolving topic. So the technology used, what they're able to do changes on a daily basis. So there's a definite need to be vigilant. And what worked, the security measures you put in place 2 years ago may have little effect on today's attacks. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a constantly moving target, and there's without completely going off the grid and not using the technology or anything connected to the web. It's hard to say that you're going to be immune from any attack. So as I mentioned, we'll get into some of some of the governing and rulemaking bodies for the legal profession, like the ABA and a couple of state bars, talk about in terms of cybersecurity and what are the responsibilities of law firms and attorneys when it comes to safeguarding their clients' data. So the ABA, and state bars are in the process of catching up regarding the issue of data breach and cybercrime. But one of the issues that there's a lot of potential ways for cyber criminals to exploit weaknesses in systems, in software, in the hardware that we all use in the legal profession, or my clients use in the legal profession. We see it on a daily basis, whether it's email, phishing attacks through email, the tools that they use, the people using unencrypted hardware, people using their personal Gmail and Dropbox accounts for sensitive client data, which in virtually every law firm I go into to provide either forensic services or e-discovery services. Virtually every single law firm I've been into in the last year at least, somebody in that firm, I can guarantee you, is using their personal Dropbox account to store and manage client data. It's happening, kind of every day, but, and the reason is twofold. It's simple and therefore convenient. Essentially, most people have a personal Dropbox account for some reason. The simplicity and convenience of it, can't be denied. But also cost. Essentially you get a few gigs free, and that's all people are going to use. So the problem with that is that when you have things like that, the security isn't going to be as good. People themselves don't take necessary precautions for those types of things. And then not to mention the intermingling of personal and client or business data is not something that that should be done or encouraged. So, I mean, that's something to think about when you decide that you're going to, or your paralegal is going to go and do some work on a weekend. So they just email themselves something to their personal Gmail account, or just throw it in their Dropbox account so they can access the documents over the weekend. While the intent is good, there's steps being missed in the kind of execution and the processes and procedures that you have in place. And no matter what processes you have in place, if people don't follow them, again, that goes back to the human element that's prevalent in a lot of data breaches and cyber attacks. Those are things that, if you spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars putting all this great technology in place and systems, it's not going to do any good. So for the ABA, Model Rule 1.6c requires that a lawyer shall make, quote, reasonable efforts to prevent inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of information relating to the representation of a client. The word reasonable is something that you'll see a lot when it comes to concerning this stuff. What is reasonable? We'll try and define that a little bit, although that is kind of like the figuring out how someone is going to execute a cyber attack is kind of a moving target. And then there was a 2011 opinion where the ABA considered this Rule 1.6 in the context of attorney-client communications. One thing that the ABA opinion about this noted was that a lawyer must act competently in terms of protecting confidentiality of clients' information in order to be able to claim to provide competent representation to a client, and that they must act competently to safeguard the information relating to the representation of that client. So again, there's not necessarily specific. You're not going to find specific things in terms, use this software, use this process. There's just general guidance on you must do something. Now, state bars have, depending on which state you're practicing in, you may find specific where the state bar has addressed it. You may not. Here in Pennsylvania, where I'm based, the PA bar has said that reasonable care includes creating plans to address security breaches, including the identification of persons to be notified about any known or suspected security breach involving confidential data. So one of their criteria for saying you took reasonable care is to have a plan in place for if or when something happens. Again, what does reasonable care mean? With the changing landscape and the potential threat out there, I think it would be safe to say that taking reasonable care does not include doing nothing to secure your data. And in this case, there's specific guidance on at least having a plan in place should something happen. So it's not saying that what should be done prior to, but it's saying if something does happen, you need to have a plan in place to address that breach. Now, Oregon takes it a different approach and a little bit further, where they're saying that the reasonableness of the steps taken will be measured against the technology available at the time to secure data against unintentional disclosure. So, as essentially they've built in some criteria for as technology changes and as the threats change, so too must we all address our own security procedures, our own data security measures, and adjust as needed. So, and then it goes on to say a lawyer may be required to reevaluate the protective measures used by third-party providers to safeguard client materials. That would include someone like myself, who's an e-discovery and computer forensic provider, to address the safeguards that we use, and that's something that we're constantly looking at and putting resources towards to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve as much as possible to make sure that our clients' data, and that includes running, having steps in place to identify if anyone does ever try something against our systems, but also running periodic checks to try and find vulnerabilities on our own and address those internally before they become an issue. So it's a constantly evolving landscape where we are data services providers. It's something that we constantly have to be in tune with, and even here with the Oregon Bar, they're saying the attorneys and firms need to be on top of that stuff. And again, what you used 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago may not be adequate today. So that type of thing I think is important when it comes to addressing whether the standard of reasonableness. So a little here's a little food for thought in terms of a survey that ILTA, or the International Legal Technologies Association, had done, where that kind of delved into what firms are doing or were not doing as of 2011 in terms of data security. So, Kai, do you want to get into the specifics there?
Sure. So, I mean, as you can see, these numbers in almost every case, are very, very high. Two-factor authentication, I'm going to show you why this is something that is really important to implement in any situation where it's available. For those that don't know, two-factor authentication is based on something that you have. If anyone's working in a corporate environment or has, you've probably seen an RSA token or a card. As far as USB drives being encrypted, USBs are also very convenient, right? So, we're going to take something home, off of the server. We're going to work on it over the weekend. We may use drives. Let's just say that gets lost. It falls out of your pocket when you're getting out of your car. Someone picks it up, opens it up, discovers, there's all kinds of information on there. If it's not encrypted, that's free for everyone to read. Email. Email just is not safe to send sensitive information. If it's not encrypted, those packets can be captured over the internet. So anyone that captures those packets can read them. Laptops stolen all the time. Let's say you're a solo attorney. You're working on one computer. You have a laptop. Let's say that you go home for the weekend. You take your work with you. You put your laptop in your trunk, and your car gets stolen. That laptop and all the data on it, if it's not encrypted, again, is easily accessed. Doesn't matter if it's password protected. It's very easy to bypass the password with anyone with a little bit of technology. Laptop tracking technology is another one. We've all probably heard of LoJack used for cars. When someone steals the car, the police can track it by GPS. There's the same technology available for mobile devices. And as far as intrusion detection, a lot of people think that they are safe simply because they can't detect anything happening, anything noticeable. But a lot of the attacks are so subtle that they're not visual to the naked eye, which I will show you, in the demo. Intrusion detection is able to, detect these very subtle attacks. And intrusion prevention is like, a firewall. A lot of companies do have firewalls, but this number is still staggering. I mean, the percentages should be on the small end, not on the big end. That's all I have to share.
Okay. So coming up, just to give a final example before we break into the hacking demo that Kai is going to show, we have just a further one more example of how law firms or attorneys can be affected by a cyber attack, or a data breach.
I feel like I got sucker punched.
A local man is out nearly $300,000 tonight, the result of an elaborate scheme. Experts say it's an example of a phishing scam gone into overdrive.
As Team 10 investigator Michael Chen found out, the successful attorney says he got another shock when he went to his bank for help.
The scam started with an email that appeared to be sent from the Postal Service. It ended with a wire transfer for nearly $300,000. This is the email that arrived in John's mailbox more than a week ago. An email from an address ending in USPS.gov trying to reschedule a package delivery with additional instructions a click away.
I wanted to see what the package was, so I clicked on the Word document.
John, an attorney, asked us not to show his face for fear of hurting his firm. Hours after clicking on the attachment, John was back on the computer attempting to access the firm's account with Pacific Premier Bank. After entering his ID, he was transferred to a page asking for his PIN instead of the typical password. Soon after, he got a call from a man claiming to be from the bank, noticing he was having trouble logging on. John was asked to type in his PIN and a token number, a code for wire transfers, which changes by the minute.
I just wanted to log into my accounts, and I thought this guy was helping me.
John ended up at a site saying the page was down for maintenance. 2 days later, the man called back and John repeated the steps. Hours later, John discovered a transfer for $289,000 to a Chinese bank, a big chunk of the account.
I'm shocked that it happened to me. I feel like a dummy, basically.
Eva Velazquez, president of the Identity Theft Resource Center, believes a virus was capturing the attorney's keystrokes. John says when he went to the bank, they declined to cover the loss for theft.
Really varies from institution to institution, and the only way for you to know what that coverage is to read those terms and conditions and, of course, ask questions.
Michael Chen, 10 News.
Wow. Well, John has filed a report with the FBI. Meanwhile, Velasquez says if you have any doubts about an email, don't click on the link. Instead, contact the company or the agency.
And before we start the, the hacking demo, if you're having trouble seeing the screen, you can enlarge the screen at the end or at the bottom right corner of the slide widget. You'll be able to drag that down.
So now I'm going to pass the presentation for this part over to Kai, where he's going to show kind of the ease of getting into a system, the victim system, and also kind of some of the ways and that the cyber attacker can actually gather the information, so you can get an idea for what's kind of going on behind the scenes, and hopefully paint a picture for some of the things that need to happen to make sure that you protect against this type of thing. And we have gotten some questions coming in So keep the questions coming in. After the hacking demo part, we'll answer as many questions as we can get to in the allotted time. But with that, I am going to pass it off to Kai.
Hi, everyone. Okay, first things first, just so you can identify what I'm doing, the screen on the left is the attacker machine, and the screen on the right is the victim machine. You know, it's a typical Windows 7 machine. You know, it's got Office, I've Outlook open, a couple other applications installed that you would see in a typical Office environment. So first here we have, you know, a tool called Metasploit. It's basically a pen testing framework. It's one of the most common tools that security people as well as cyber criminals and hackers use. So let me just get started. So essentially when an attacker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an attack via email. And the first thing that the attacker has to set up is he has to set up what's called a listener for the incoming connection. So I'm going to set up a listener right now. Okay. And so then I have to configure it. So I'm going to set what's called the payload, which is the attack. And then I have to set the attacker's, you know, IP address. So I'm going to set. And then I have to set the port, the communication port, which the incoming connection from the victim machine is going to be on. I'm going to set that to 443. And then I hit exploit. And so what this does is it sets up a listener and just waits for the victim to click. Now what I'm going to do, just to show you, we've all gotten these spoofed emails, right? So I'm just going to write an email, and I'm going to send it to the victim. In this case, it's hacker victim, and just test. I'm just going to send a test email, and now look at the inbox for the victim machine. Should come in shortly. Okay. So you see this is a test email. It shows that it's from k.pfiester@comcast.net. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is, let's say I want to lure the victim into clicking on something I know they'll click on. So let's say my target is an attorney in Pennsylvania. What I can do is I can go to the PA Bar Association. I can put in their URL. And I can use this tool to extract the email addresses on the website. Okay, so in this instance, I'm going to use info@pabar.org. So what I'm going to do is I don't want the victim to think that it's the attacker. I want the victim to think that the email came from the PA Bar Association. So here I'm going to put info@pabar.org as the email address. I'm going to change the reply to info@pabar.org. I'm going to put the organization name as PA Bar Association. And I'm going to change the name to info account. Okay. Then I'm going to attach an infected PDF called Membership Rules 2015. Okay. And I'm going to tell the victim new membership rules. This is just a crude example. It can get much more sophisticated. And then I'm going to just say, dear member, due to recent policy changes, we have updated our membership rules. Please review immediately to add a sense of urgency. Thank you. We'll leave out a signature, you get the point. And we're going to send this to our victim. And I hit send. Update folder. It'll take a second to show up. Okay. So you see the email has come in. It shows that it's from the PA Bar Association, which it's completely spoofed, which means it's faked. It came from the attacker. But to the victim, it appears that it came from a legitimate person. So if this target was a member of the Bar Association, they would click on it. Now what I want you to do, all right, so try to pay attention to what's going on the left of the screen. So I hit save, I go to open this, and it gives me a message that says, to view the encrypted content, please tick the do not show this message again box, which sometimes happens, a legitimate message. But it does say the file may contain programs, macros, or viruses that could potentially harm your computer. But most people, if they're not properly trained, are going to say, oh, that's from the Pennsylvania Bar Admission, the bar, so let me just hit open. Now, when I hit open, pay attention to what happens on the left of the screen. Okay, I've just broken into the machine. You can see that nothing notable is happening on the victim machine. There's no evidence of a compromise whatsoever. Now, if I hit Get UID, it shows that I'm connected to the victim PC. So if I type in host name over on the victim machine, okay, so you see that. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at some of the processes that are running on the computer. And I'm going to migrate into a process called Windows Explorer, which in this case is 1564. So once I migrate into 1564, okay, so migration is completed successfully. Now I have a whole host of tools available at my disposal. But what I'm going to do for illustrative purposes is I'm going to start a keylogger. So this is keyspan underscore start. Okay. So let's say I go to compose an email, and I'm going to here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to type this to myself, and I'm going to say my client admitted his guilt. And now here's an, if I hit key scan underscore dump, you can see right here that all of the text that this individual types was caught. Now let's say that the client is looking, the attorney is looking at an email. So let's open up this email. Whatever you're looking at, you can type the command screenshot. And right now I just captured what the victim was looking at on their screen. And this could be an attacker that's sitting in China. It really doesn't matter where they're physically located. So attorneys also tend to use case management software. So in this case, let's say that you had you were using Needles or something like that, or any other case management software. Comcast, and this is your login. So here, you could potentially have messages from clients. You can have all kinds of stuff. Be billing them. Any kind of sensitive information. The person could take a screenshot of this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to key scan dump and show that the login credentials were captured. If you were working on a legal brief, you just started, for here I'm just going to say my Social Security number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm sorry, I meant to put dashes, but you do that again, you see that the Social Security number that was typed was captured. Let me see. So lastly, I want to show you a couple tools that are available. You see here, you can stream the person's webcam. You can turn on their microphone if your laptop has a microphone. Let's say that you were having a conversation between you and your client, and your laptop had a microphone, and your machine was compromised. That conversation can be recorded. Here, I showed you have the keystroke logger. You have screenshots that can be taken. Here, you can force a reboot to the machine. Let's say that there was software running. You can terminate it. You can also, from the command prompt, you can just type command shell, and that gives you the command prompt on that machine. So the attacker, once they compromise the one machine, they're going to try and spread across the network. Type all. And so here, what this is now doing, this is showing the router. The IP configuration of the network. So then they can then scan for other hosts on the network and go on. So I think that's it for the demo. We're running out of time, so I'll let them move on.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Kai. That's, I know no matter how many times I see that, it always sends a little bit of a chill down the spine to see how easy it is once somebody is in there. So TASA is offering currently some data security services that we wanted to mention, and they range from user training to deal with some of the issues that we mentioned in the beginning of the call in terms of trying to educate the users in your firm on how to avoid some of these issues, including what Kai just demonstrated with clicking on and opening and running a program without realizing it, thinking it's just an attachment. So training firm staff on secure computer usage, ensuring compliance across your entire organization, providing some resources for data security, and outlining some best practices and protocols. In partnership with TASA, we're also offering some vulnerability assessments and that essentially is to assess the risk associated with your network and systems as they stand today. So identifying assets and access points, identifying human weaknesses, providing a comprehensive list or report of vulnerabilities prioritized by the vulnerability. The vulnerability assessment is performed by a certified data security expert, and at the end of the assessment, you receive an actionable report to make sure that those issues get addressed, whether it's by your current IT professionals or data security professionals that you're using now. But in our third risk remediation services, we can also help with that with certified experts. Again, that includes everything from analysis of your risks, development of data breach protocols, as was mentioned in the PA State Bar, where they were looking in terms of their reasonable care claim to identify that there were steps and processes in place, implementing best practices, patching vulnerable assets, doing additional penetration testing, which is a deeper level of the vulnerability assessments, and then again, providing some actionable reports from that penetration testing to make sure that you are covered. So, and then so again, the idea is to help the firms that we work with not be that kind of low-hanging fruit, easy opportunity, but also to protect their clients and their own assets and data. So we'll break into the question portion. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to enter them in.
Okay, our first question is, how much does this data security cost?
So, that's a very good question, something that, regardless of the issue, it always the issue of cost always comes up because there's a concern that data security remediation and implementing data security processes and procedures is always going to be some astronomical sum. But I think it depends. It depends on kind of what your systems are, what your level of risk is. So it's going to obviously, a massive, 1,000 attorney firm is going to be different than a 2-attorney firm. And same thing in the corporate world. A 5-person small business is going to be different than what a Target or a Sony or pick any, or a GE is going to be. So it's going to depend on those types of factors. It's going to depend on what type of data you're housing. So unfortunately, it's kind of the age-old it depends. So, but to find out kind of what that risk profile is, and to take some steps does not have to be some expensive astronomical amount, and that's one of the reasons that the TASA Group has put together some of these offerings is to help firms, mid-sized firms, small firms, solos, even to help deal with some of these issues.
And the next question is, what about antivirus software? Does that help at all with these risks?
Antivirus software is helpful in some ways, but I'll actually pass this question off to Kai to get into deeper on.
Antivirus is absolutely necessary, but it's not an end-all, be-all solution in and of itself. The most effective way to protect yourself is to use what the military uses as far as a concept called defense in depth. The more obstacles you have in place, the better your chances of catching an attack in the early stages. That involves training your employees, having the right technologies in place, having computers configured in the right way. Ultimately, no one can tell you that you're going to be 100% secure, and anyone that does is lying to you. What you're ultimately what every company, even the U.S. government, is striving to do is reduce their attack surface. When you reduce that profile, you greatly increase your chance of not getting hit.
We have a follow-up question as well, Kai. What kind of software is available that will sniff out any kind of keystroke sniffers on the PC?
There's your antivirus, anti-spyware programs. There are some out there, but the problem that you run into is there are very sophisticated tools out there that encode malware, which, keystroke logger is just one form of malware, that encrypts it and keeps, doing these repeat iterations of encoding to where the antivirus programs can't see it. So it does get a little tricky and hairy, but it really depends on the sophistication of the attack. I mean, just like there's more professionals there's less professionals. You think about a pyramid, right? So there's less professionals at the top, the apex. You have less of those people. So if you have less of those people, the attacks, the likelihood of getting attacked by those individuals is very small. But when you go to the bottom of the pyramid or the mid-grade, that's where your numbers increase. And, the antivirus will help against most attacks. But
yeah, I think that's a good point that, as necessary as antivirus software is, it's not going to detect everything. Again, there's new types of attacks being formulated all the time, and we constantly see people who have up-to-date antivirus software, but people have been on their servers and on their systems for days, weeks, or months without them realizing it. So I think the best goal is to hopefully not let somebody into your system in the first place. But it's hard to say that any one software is going to fit the bill.
And our next
hold on, let me just give a quick example is, there are tools that come native on a Windows system now. One of them is called PowerShell. It's a tool that Microsoft has developed and puts on the machine. There are forms of attacks that use PowerShell to break into the machine. And because that software is native to Windows, any malware detection software is not going to flag it. So, like removing that is an example. So, your antivirus might not catch that, but having that software removed from the system or disabled will then make you safer. So, it's a multi-step process. Good.
Okay, we do have some additional questions, but since we are going over time, we will get back to you with those questions. We do have your email addresses, so we will be able to address those. Okay. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and especially Pfiester and Shawn Huston for their time and effort in creating this presentation. If you would like to speak with either of the presenters, or if you would like to speak with a TASA representative regarding data security services or an expert witness for a case that you are working on, please contact TASA at 1-800-523-2319. This is a reminder that we will be sending out a link to you tomorrow with the archive recording. The archive recording will also be posted in the Knowledge Center on TASA's website. If you have any questions or comments, please email Carol Kowaleski. Thank you all again. Have a great day, everyone.